Hello and welcome to a Song of Ice and Fire Miniatures Battle Report, this time featuring two games, both with Rattleshirt. The first was versus Gregor Clegane and the second versus Jon Snow. These are just Thursday night games down at the club, but they are an interesting and fun chance to try some different stuff, particularly coming off the back of an event that we had recently where I played my unethical Varamyr list all 3 rounds. It did very, very well, but this is casual play at the club, and it was an opportunity to try some different stuff. So what we're trying tonight is a pretty spicy Rattleshirt list, and where the reason why I'm doing two battle reports is I made a small iteration on the list during the two games, and I thought it would be interesting just to see how the testing process that I use for lists work, and maybe apply that yourself. So here we are set up for the first game, and we're playing against a Lannister list. Again, this is not necessarily a hugely optimized list on either side, but I do have some hopes for the list that I'm playing here. So before I get into the lists, what we have here is we are set up for Dance with Dragons. There are 3 objectives across the center, and what we've done with terms of terrain is this is going to be very swamp heavy. I have Ygritte in my list, so I'm happy to play swamps, and my opponent placed swamps mostly on the grounds that he had faster pieces, much faster pieces than I did that could move through them, whereas my list, if I had cavalry, they were slow, and if I had infantry, they were infantry. He's also done what I would call kind of like a classic, not exactly mistake, but he's placed the good old-fashioned Lannister corpse pile. He hasn't gone for 2 at least, but it's kind of worth noting that Lannisters are in a bit of a mixed position when it comes to placing corpse piles. This list is leadership 7, like across the board. It does not like seeing corpse piles, so maybe this corpse pile was not the best play, and maybe the forests weren't the best play either, but it isn't just an interesting option. So in terms of deployment, let's have a look at my list first. The main thing that's in this list is 2 units of bears. Now, this unit here may not look like a unit of bears. It might look like a unit of dwarfs in power armor, which I use as my light cavalry for my dwarf army. Yes, that is the light cavalry. I'll show the heavy cavalry at some point. It is particularly heavy. But this is a unit of bears because it's the closest I have to cavalry bases. I don't own 2 units of bear cavalry, and as you can see, my first unit of bear cavalry isn't even painted. But we have 2 units of bear cavalry with Rattleshirt, and so obviously the rest of the list is pretty light on, because that's 16 points of stuff. So all we have for infantry are a single unit of raiders with a raid leader, and then Rattleshirt himself in a unit of trappers. And this is very light for infantry for free folk who have multiple cards that kind of rely on infantry. But what I'm hoping to do here, in particular with coordination tactics, there is an interesting thing that happens with Rattleshirt where you can theoretically use coordination tactics kind of at the beginning of any turn, even if you think the bears are going to be going into combat on the other side of the table, because Rattleshirt's order has global range. And in fact, that's kind of like one of the... Rattleshirt is not a great commander, but one of the things he does that's very interesting is that he is a global range support commander, because his trophy-taking order, which pulls a card from his deck or discard pile and attaches it to a unit when the usual conditions are met, happens regardless of range. So I can have these 2 infantry units just chilling, playing backwards, and if I draw coordination tactics, I can use it to give Rattleshirt's order to the unit of raiders, and then the unit of raiders can use Rattleshirt's order, Rattleshirt can use his order, in order to really make sure that the bears get juiced up very quickly. Otherwise, to maximize activations in the list, which I don't actually think is necessary having played the list now, but nevertheless, is we have Varamyr and his wolf pack, and off the table, currently over here somewhere, is the Shadowcat. So with our 2 NCUs, we have, in this version of the list, Ygritte and Val, puts us at 9 activations with a bit of a heavy focus on mobility. I am hoping to, but aren't ever going to, attempt to use the Traps plus Ygritte combo. So for those who aren't familiar with it, you can use Ygritte to give someone -1 speed, and then use the Traps to give them another -1 speed, which can do something like, for example, make Champions of the Stag speed 2. I have typically found that to be more of a gimmick than actually useful, but sometimes it can be a big deal. Generally, though, you're going to put Ygritte's influence on one of the 2 bears, and that's just because they are speed 4. Taking cavalry to speed 5 really helps. You'll notice that I've deployed Varamyr hanging out with bears and bears. Basically how this list works, and my usual modus operandi when playing free folk, is to have more deployments than my opponent. So what we've done is we've deployed the wolf pack first, and then the raiders, and then Rattleshirt. And these are all non-committal deployments. And at that point, I've seen much of my opponent's deployment, and I can sort of stack this flank. Varamyr, I think, also came down early, and if my opponent had concentrated on this side of the table, then that's fine, Varamyr would have gone and probably seized this objective, but when my opponent spread out, Varamyr is now going to run with the bears. And I actually quite like, even just the combination of Varamyr plus one bear cavalry unit, tends to have just enough force to punch through most things. Bear cav they're pretty good, but they won't always succeed in decisively winning one-on-one fights, but when you add in Varamyr, I find that they kind of can. On my opponent's side of the table, he's gone for a moderately thematic list, but one which is actually going to be pretty good against me, which is frustrating. So this is an all Clegane list. Because they're not fully painted, you can't really see them that easily, but every single unit here is either Clegane Brigands or Clegane Mountains Men with an attachment. So the Mountain himself is in the center. Sandor Clegane, excellent one-point attachment, is over here on this flank. And then we have an Intimidating Presence guy, I think it's an Assault Veteran, over in this flank. There are only two NCUs, Peter Baelish and Pycelle, which is an excellent lightweight NCU loadout for Lannisters. I tend to prefer 3 NCUs for Lannisters, but there is some merit to this. This sort of 30 points worth of just 6-point good stuff units is admittedly more of kind of like a Stark build, but this is actually a Stark player running this Lannister list, so I kind of like this. And what he's gone and done is he's put the 6-point cavalry down first, which has given him a little bit of flexibility in his deployment because they're very fast, they can move very quickly, but he's ended up making the decision to contest all 3 objectives, mostly because I've had more disposable deployments than he has, so he makes this call. And as soon as sort of like these ones have gone down, so if we think about the actual deployment order here, deployments have been something like 1 for me, 1 for him, 2 for me, 2 for him, 3 for me, 3 for him, 4 for me, 4 for him, and at this point it doesn't really matter where he is. He is spread out. So bears come down here and here. Actually, I think he may have even he did begin deploying first. So I've seen all of his army by the time I'm going to deploy my 2 bears, and I can deploy them for force concentration. And I think that makes this list, like this is significant to this list, where you are aiming to always be able to place these bears after your opponent's deployment is revealed. And that's why, for example, you couldn't really make this list work with 3 NCUs, not least because you wouldn't really have enough infantry. You could trade Varamyr and his beasts out for a Raider unit and an NCU unit, but then you would not be able to just deploy flexibly and slam those bears once you know where they'll be best used. So I've won the deployment roll here. I've let my opponent pick deployment side. He's picked and deployed over here. I've deployed over here, which means I have the choice of first or second turn. Now, normally with Free Folk, I would usually like to go first on the first turn, because that means that the swords will be open for me on the third turn. I don't usually expect to be in melee on turn 2, but in this case, I have zippy bears. I have Ygritte and Val and bears which have charging volley, which means that I can, if I desire to, charge off the swords by making a ranged attack and then a charge as early as turn 2, maybe even turn 1. So I've elected to let my opponent go first so that I will be going first in turn 2. And he kicks things off by having Pycelle take the horse, and move these guys up to here. And I have an activation advantage over him, right? It's Free Folk. I have 9 activations in this list, thanks to Varamyr and the Beasts, which means I'm going to have, against a 7 activation lists, usually, a couple of activations at the end of the turn. And that's going to end up being decisive. So in the first turn, basically everything's going to move forward, and he's quite good, my opponent here, at not committing too much, but he's used to playing against Free Folk that aren't particularly mobile. He's used to sort of thinking, yeah, it's Free Folk, I got a couple of turns, I'll just hold formation. So things begin to move forward, and nothing overextends too heavily, or at least that's how it looks. And so we end up with kind of this line formed here, and I'm equally non-committal, right? Varamyr just sort of chills up here, because I know that he has assault orders. So what I want to avoid is a situation where, and the bogs will help, but I want to avoid a situation where he can like yeet a unit of cavalry forward, and I don't have a response, and then make an assault orders charge. This list has the potential to be very, very aggressive, because those cavalry can reposition 18 inches, potentially, with their speed 6, and then charge off of any zone if Assault Orders is in hand. Now, I would really like to see this list have 3 NCUs, to be honest, because with Bribery and Assault Orders in the deck, that is 4 cards that require you to replace zones, and 2 NCUs is just a bit shy once you're doing that. You could accomplish that by taking out, see, it wouldn't be easy, but with 5-point what are they called? Halberdiers. I think you could just about accomplish it if you downgraded what would have to be 2 of the units to three. Actually, no, all 3 of the mountsmen would have to become Halberdiers, which obviously really slims the theme of the list down. So I don't know, maybe this is fine. I don't dislike Mountainsman. Halberdiers are huge value at 5 points, and Gregor and Sandor would make the two of the 3 Halberdier units into Clegane units. So it would probably be a more competitively optimal list, having a 3rd NCU, 8 activations, lots of zone replacement. You've got Baelish and then the 4 cards. But in this case, he's gone for a theme, and he certainly has been rewarded because almost my entire list is going to be very easy for him to trigger the numbers benefit, the if you're attacking someone with the same or more ranks, that the various Mountainsmen units have. So he's got a list that is like mechanically, despite being maybe Halberdiers are a little bit better on a point-for-point basis, Mountainsmen certainly will thrive in this environment. But because I've got an activation advantage on him, he ends up kind of like set out in this line over here, but he only has 2 NCUs. And what he starts doing is he takes the horse, I take the letters, and then I'm sort of moving things forward, and he doesn't see a lot of value in having like any other particular zones, and just to pass the time, he begins to chip away at my morale 8 trappers with Baelish taking the crowns. I mean, it's fine, it gives him rerolls, he's got a counterplot in hand potentially, and he will actually chip away at this unit quite a bit over the course of the game, but what that's done is it has left the swords free. And so as the last 2 activations of my turn, the unit of bears that has Ygritte basically yeets forward 15 inches and then claim the swords, shift forward, make a ranged attack, and then charge. And so on the first turn, I am in a particularly strong position because I have slammed into one of his cavalry units. Here's a quick shot of deployment, just by the way, for those who are interested. These are the dwarven steam armor troopers. I liked the models; they're from Cyborg Miniatures, and I needed something that would go onto a cavalry-sized base. And these were much cheaper than the like mountain goat riders that Cyborg sells, or the bear riders, which are shockingly expensive. So here's how things look at the beginning of the second turn, and we can see basically this is grim. I have not rolled particularly well all game, and I'm not going to roll particularly well all game. But this kind of concentration of force, right, these guys are going to be out of the game for most of the game. I am comfortable holding these off. I am hoping that Gregor comes forward and picks this up. If my opponent picks both of these up, I can destroy him piecemeal. We're in a really good situation. But yeah, the very first attack of the game happens on the first turn with this charge being made. And then, of course, immediately I have Ygritte activate, influence these guys, make a ranged attack, and make a charge, and then they line up in there. And I think they actually do. They destroy this unit. And so at that point, I've got 2 copies of armor trophies out. Things are looking pretty good for basically nothing other than the heavy extension of these units. But these units both have 3+ saves now, which is a nice Rattleshirt thing. We've taken these out. Actually, I think I roll like absolute pants and maybe don't kill them with a charging volley and charge, but I will eventually destroy these this turn before they get to activate. However, it's at this point that Sandor shows his quality and off assault orders charges in there. And these guys, although I've weakened them by taking the letters earlier in the game, through weakened, and I think with no rerolls, they are hitting on 3s, nevertheless. They have crit blow, hitting on 3s, vicious, because they are attacking a unit with fewer ranks, and they just go to town. 3+ saves do nothing for me. This unit just gets almost blown through, and it is just their wound count that makes them sort of survive. Although that's pretty standard for bears, right? They have lower saves but more wounds. They end up being like identically survivable to any other 3+ save, 6+ morale unit of cavalry. I think they're identical to Flayed Men and to Knights of Casterly Rock. They're actually a little worse. I did the math on this a while back. They're a little worse against just regular frontal attacks. So exactly this kind of attack that Sandor and his men are making, but they are better once you start adding in things like sundering and effects that do automatic wounds like Gregor. So we're going to end up in a situation where there is basically a big scrap happening here with Sandor's unit, but he can't beat multiple of these units and Varamyr. And there's a bit of like back and forth and, attacks against each. I keep weakening this unit with by taking the letters, but Varamyr and Sandor and the Bear Riders are going to end up basically fighting back and forth over this objective, which the Bears picked up with their charge. And eventually, it's going to take some time, but eventually both of these units are going to have been destroyed. And Gregor, having claimed this objective, is really going to be in a position where he's pivoting in towards the center of the table. And we can actually see that here, which has jumped forward to beginning of turn 3. So my opponent does have 2 objectives. You can see Gregor is holding one and the Assault Veteran unit is holding the other, but that's all that's happening, right? He's just like, he's lost this unit over here, and Sandor is fighting against 11 points of stuff with Rattleshirt buffs over here. Now, thanks to Fueled by Slaughter, which is a very, very good ability, Sandor is going to like hold this fight for a couple of turns, but he's not going to win forever. Weakened from Pycelle is going a huge distance, etc. And I'm going to eventually break through this. And I don't know if it's a mistake, but what my opponent really should do at this point is probably begin pulling back and just kind of like forming a line. I don't know if that would have been the best play. I don't know if it would have been a winning play, rather, but he is holding 2 objectives. And it kind of leaves Sandor to his death, and I will eventually pivot these pieces forward and move in and fight Gregor. But it's not impossible that Gregor, if he executes a sufficient fighting retreat, can handle that. And that just sort of like leaves these things isolated and doing nothing. It would overcome the advantage. So I've taken an advantage here by concentrating force on this part of the table. If he is able to pull back and deny me the use of these pieces, then he would sort of mitigate some of that. But he doesn't. What he does instead is the cavalry come in and they hit this unit here, and I think they bring them down to like 1 model surviving, but then they get collapsed in on. They don't kill this unit. He has Overrun in hand. He's hoping for this kill, but weakened on the brigands makes the difference. And before they can overrun, I hit them from basically all sides, and they get properly annihilated. So that puts down the 2nd cavalry unit, and puts me in a situation where I am definitely hemorrhaging sort of elements, and the bears, I think both bear units are going to end up in a really bad state by the end of this game. 3+ saves just are not enough to save them with the armor trophies, even with 4 wounds. But we are basically this huge pile of wounds and power is eventually going to push through. So head to turn 4 here, and you can see the cavalry having charged in and the collapse around. They've been annihilated. This fight is continuing, but it's going to conclude this turn. On turn 4, this is just, by the way, this is testament to like how good Sandor is. I am admittedly rolling like absolute trash on this flank. Like, it's been consistently really bad. Like, it's like something like a 30% success rate with 3+ saves, like 50% hit rate with 2+ to hit. Like, it's been ridiculous. But these units are going to, this turn, push through Sandor. Fueled by Slaughter is such a good ability. It's so good. For 1 point plus Furious Charge, he's an absolute bomb. And if this was Unit of Halberdiers, they'd probably be in a better spot, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, no, actually 3+ to hit versus 4+ to hit. It would be close. He's incredible, but he's going to eventually be, even this 7-point module fighting 11 points of stuff with commander support, he's going to get wiped out this turn. Varamyr will hang on to this objective, and so the fight now is going to be around the center. Now, Gregor is going to make a very game go of it, but he's holding this objective, and I think what actually happens is he goes for like a 4+ charge. I use the traps to make it into a 5+ charge. He fails. Does he make it into combat? No, he gets stuck, and it's worthwhile going for, right? But he ends up sort of in this position here, and at that point, it's just going to be really bad for him. Like, everything's going to collapse in on him, and there's just, I think even the coup de grace is delivered by the wolves who come around and hit him in the rear, and so that takes Gregor out, and at that point, the game is effectively done. We play through for a turn just because it's amusing to have, like, you know, everything collapse in on these guys, but at that point, I have more VPs and am holding more objectives. So you can see sort of the end game state here, where actually the trappers have been destroyed and have been replaced by an Endless Horde unit. But yeah, everything is coming around. Now, it's a bit of a testament. This is interesting, right? Where we have the bears. They have survived just barely, but they are intact. I have the same number of units I started the game with, although one of them is an Endless Horde respawn. And it was interesting, right? So this is the end of the first game. I'm actually going to, I think, just barely fail to kill these guys this turn, but I will table my opponent on turn 6. So game ends with tabling, but I think I go up to 10 points when I kill the unit that I have tabled. Now, this was actually a relatively successful test. A bunch of things worked surprisingly well. The double infantry in a free folk list had some limitations, but like it was kind of okay. But the thing that I noticed, and what I will now do in the second game, the change that I made, was that literally at no point in the entire game did I use Val as Val. She just claimed zones all game. And that was really interesting. Now, in retrospect, perhaps that shouldn't have been surprising. only 2 units in this entire list don't have cavalry moves. Every single other piece, like the list is overwhelmingly hypermobile. So the use of Val was really just the old free folk activation advantage into charge extension, etc., which canny players will play against, like will play around anyway. And so given I was getting almost no value from her, I should change her. And I only have the 4 points unless I want to restructure the list, and there are some changes I could potentially make, but if I want to keep it at 9 activations, and I did like having the different, like the beasts as attack elements are kind of fun, and they play, because they're mobile, they play with the cavalry and everything. There's kind of like a mechanical theme there that is good. So that really just, I do not need mats, because this list just burns through tactics cards, because you're using coordinated orders, coordination tactics to copy Rattleshirt's order to get more Rattleshirt cards. I had no cards left by the end of the game. So it's Craster. Craster comes in. Now, Craster is not a great NCU with bears because his little spot healing just is not. They have such a deep wound pool as their survival mechanic that little bits of healing just don't go very far. But it's not nothing, and it's going to be more than Val was. So Craster comes in. And with Craster, we hop into game 2. So here we are in game 2. It's the same list except my NCUs over here are Craster and Ygritte instead of Craster and Val. And this is against a 6 activation Night's Watch list with a Fortune Seeker in Ranger Hunters, a Hardened Ranger in Rangers, Jon Snow in Shadow Tower Spearmen, and then Alistair Thorne in Veterans, and we have Aemon and Corin Halfhand. Excellent NCU combination, like possibly 2 of the best. Like you can maybe in Greyjoys you can spend a better 9 points on NCUs, but that's about it. Excellent NCUs. The rest of the list is the attachments are causing this list to run pretty elite. As much as the Hardened Ranger is exceptional in the Ranger Hunters, and Alistair Thorne is pretty fun in Veterans, I think there's a strong argument for cutting every single attachment from this list and putting in Ghost. That gets you another deployment, it gets you to 7 activations, Ghost is good. But I get the 6, and I think, you know, it's a reasonable approach to take, but this list is going to end up being fragile. I am not, as it happens, going to have any meaningful activation advantage against it, because we're just going to be fighting at top of turn every turn, but I think Ghost would definitely add an element that would be strong. The big experiment my opponent is making here is really the Shadow Tower Spearman with Jon. They have 8 dice set for charge, that's pretty nice, but we will conclude by the end of the game, yeah, take any other 7-point, take Rangers, take Sworn Brothers, take whatever, any other 7-point unit is going to be better on Jon. The Shadow Tower Spearmen have some very niche applications in a couple of different commanders, but yeah. So the deployment looks weird just because we're playing Here We Stand, which is the 4 quadrants scenario. And once again, deployment advantage here is going to have ended up being decisive for me. But I want to first just talk about terrain, because this terrain is going to look a little bit weird. My opponent won the roll and placed first, and so put some stakes down in the middle. But then because he had Ranger Hunters, I've done this. Now, you can only really do this in Here We Stand, where you're allowed to put terrain in the deployment zones, but this formation of stakes closes off all of this space from Ranger Vanguards arriving. You have to put them diagonally so that there can actually be 6 inches of gap between the 2 pieces of terrain. You can't just put them like straight like that, because that would leave a 6-inch gap, and you can't put them like that because it would leave a 6-inch gap. But if you put them diagonally so that the closest point between the 2 stakes is there and there is no way to place a Ranger Vanguard unit so that it's not appearing on some stakes. So this bottom point down here is just far enough down that Rangers can't appear facing this direction here, and then you have the stakes 6 inches apart or there, so you can't place Rangers either facing this direction or this direction, and then of course so that really the highest up that Rangers could come on would be up here, so it just neatly locks them out of my flank if I choose to deploy over here. And I had to do a little bit of math to figure this out, but you know, doing some geometry and actually getting the stand down and experimenting with it, I confirmed that it can work. So that's my entire terrain drop for this scenario. Just because of the Ranger Vanguards, I might not even end up with this side, but I'm otherwise happy playing with a relatively open table. In the end, I do win deployment, I win the roll, and I decide to elect, because I think we're going to be fighting very, very early. It doesn't matter hugely who is going first, so I pick this side for a lark, and yeah, it means that I can stack deployment over here if I want to, and what Rangers are going to come on over here, and that'll be the worst that happens. But as it happens, this is one of those situations where the same strength that we saw in deployment in the first game has happened again in the second game. My opponent only has 4 deployments, and so even though I am deploying first, it's wolves, and then Rattleshirt, and then Raiders, and then Varamyr. And once I've deployed all of those 4, my opponent has deployed all 4 of his. So my last two deployments are the bears, which I can place once I've seen my opponent's entire army. And he's like kind of set up, not exactly sure what I'm doing. I'm not deploying any further up because I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight any of this if I don't have to. I want to apply overwhelming force in one place with these bears and absolutely kill something. And so as soon as this unit of Ranger Vanguards comes down here, bam, down they go. And as a result, this is going to be a quick as hell game because they are going to be dead on the first turn. They will end up making a charge. They'll come in. There'll be some the Rangers will move up and destroy these stakes. This sort of like line will kind of form over here. But these guys can't really get away from these. Like they could have radically pivoted in this direction, and that would have produced a situation where the entire Night's Watch army was here, which gives me control over all of this table space, which makes scoring really easily. And we're just too close in any case. Like I can come after him. My opponent is going first in this case, so I'm going to have first turn next turn. He just has to attack. He doesn't really have any choice. And so these guys are going to come in here, and they are going to get just absolutely jobbed by these two units. And what's actually going to happen is they'll end up sort of like in this position here, and these guys will come around and hit them in the flank, and I will eventually end up destroying them with wolves in the flank, leaving these free to go after the rangers. And the wolves die for their efforts. So the wolves end up in this position here, facing this direction, and the rangers, you'll recall, have destroyed these stakes, and they have, and now his watch has ended. So as soon as these vanguards die, the rangers come around here, and they know they're putting themselves in danger. They move up to about this point here with the stakes having been destroyed, and they rear-shoot the wolves, which predictably destroys the wolves. Now, worthwhile because it frees me up for a very aggressive next turn, but yeah, rip wolves, which means that Alistair's unit will be a challenge for the rest of the game. I can't just turn all of his crap off with the wolves. So here we are at the top of turn 2, and you can see things have gotten pretty violent already. I've just been pulling back with all of this stuff. I have no interest in fighting the Night's Watch line. I just want to occupy some space. And so we've got the Rangers have been destroyed over here, and we've already made a charge into these guys. I'm going to claim the swords and wipe them out, and that's going to put me up 2 units. My opponent's going to be left with exactly 2 units to my entire army at this juncture. Now, we will play on. And Jon is going to make a game charge in here, and with his 8 dice attack, does 11 wounds to this unit of raiders. But this is here we stand. The game, basically from this point, the game is not winnable for my opponent. I'll continue to push forward. I'll continue to accumulate trophies. I'll try and sort of like heal up my bears from time to time. But the long and the short of it is that even if I just have these things here, I can feasibly just keep running away from him and occupying space at the end of every round. Here we stand is actually a scenario with a massive activation advantage, like favoring, because if you have a couple of mobile elements that are worth a few points, even if it's just an NCU, because NCUs can go into zones in this scenario, you can just accumulate you just put your points where you need to. You just do your math at the end of each round, you measure to see where the things are, and you use your last couple of activations to score the whole table, usually. You will aim to score. Usually you're looking to either score 2 to your opponent's 1 or 3 to your opponent's 1 every turn, just by moving things around to kind of dominate where points are. And with a list that has so many cavalry pieces, particularly 16 points of these guys and 5 points of Varamyr and the cat. Varamyr and the cat, by the way, is an optimal scenario scoring tool. Like, you just put them by themselves in any one zone, and they score that zone if your opponent has nothing there. My opponent would have to do something like take a core and a half hand off the NCU table and put him in a zone in order to even contest me there. So basically, from here on out, the Rattleshirt train, these guys getting buffed, I've been prioritizing armor trophies on them before weapon trophies. I don't know if that's correct. I think it's very possible that when these guys made this charge here, I got armor trophies onto them by using coordination tactics. So Rattleshirt gave his order to the raiders, and then when I made the charge at the end of the turn, I could use that second copy of Rattleshirt's order to fish whatever I wanted. There was a bit of an argument, I think, for going after weapon trophies here, just so that this attack, like this unit has four. This unit has four rangers left in it. You probably kill them with a 6 dice attack on bears, but you definitely kill them if that attack on bears is on a 2+. So it's possible I should be going for weapon trophies and pressing the advantage rather than armor trophies to keep things alive. But the approach certainly worked, and since I'm trying to heal them a little bit with Craster, maximizing their survivability first kind of mattered. So this is kind of the final stand of the Night's Watch, and you can see in particular the scoring situation here, where both of these units are in this quadrant here, and I'm going to eventually be able to just compress in and out point it. But I've scored this quadrant with these guys, this quadrant with these bears, and like this quadrant with these guys. Actually, I think I've left this quadrant, but pushed these guys into this quadrant. Anyway, the situation really is not recoverable for Night's Watch at this juncture. I would have to fail every single roll until the end of time, and I'm not going to. What's going to happen is that these bears are going to push in here and annihilate Jon's unit, and then they're going to come around and hit the veterans in the rear. The veterans will probably fight on for like an extra turn because they're very, very good, but they are not going to survive forever. And even if they like fought everything off, they're going to take forever to kill these bears. This is 16 wounds with 3+ saves. And I'm just going to tick up. I'm going to run Varamyr and his cat over here. I'm going to run Rattleshirt over here, and I'm also going to score this zone. I'm going to score 4 points at the end of this round. So that's the game basically done. In terms of how the list performed, it way outperformed my expectations. Rattleshirt in Trappers is actually the idea of a quite young, he's, a zoomer, but anyway, free folk player in my local meta, and he made the point that Rattleshirt really is just a remote support commander. You can put him in whatever, and his order will do the business. So, although I would classically put him in like unit of Followers of Bone, where Intimidating Presence is really good, yeah, you can just put him in a unit of Trappers and just have them hang out in the rear with the gear. And it's like, we used to do that with Mance all the time because he was a support commander, and Rattleshirt is a longer range support commander than Mance is, or ever was. So as a concept, I think I really like this. One experiment I'm going to make is the changing Varamyr's beasts. I'm going to consider changing them for a unit of raiders with the Walrus Clan Chieftain. I don't know if it's right, but I did find I had to be very passive with Rattleshirt's 2 infantry units, and in some cases I just didn't draw the Endless Horde in time. And so you really want to you want to make sure that you have some infantry units in the fight for when the Endless Horde drops. This is still free folk, it is still an infantry-centric deck, as much as Rattleshirt can buff the bears. So yeah, maybe one more infantry unit and just play down to only 8 activations. Not 100% sure there. Playing the cat just as a regular combat unit, running around, doing interesting and useful things, worked quite well in both games. Because my opponent had light cavalry in both cases, or some kind of unit that could respond to and kill the cat, every game I brought it on in a position where it would just join my battle line and fight as a unit, and it turns out it's totally fine at that. So yeah, we'll see. A little bit more experimentation required, and I probably will do a bit of playing with Rattleshirt without the 2 units of bears, because you definitely are going all in with the list. But because of the whole theory behind deployment advantage, this list ruthlessly exploits that. And it does it in a way that you wouldn't be able to. Like 2 of those bear units in one place is just usually going to be force deployed, like your opponent can't respond to, and which will probably overwhelm just about anything. Particularly with the wolves present, I don't know if there's any individual defensive piece that you can't put down with that combination, because you have the wolves to turn off defensive tech, and then you have 2 bear units, and the 2 bear units should do enough damage, particularly if you go end of round, start of round, to engineer a breakthrough and have Rattleshirt's cards to carry up on that advantage. So ultimately, super interesting list. This is just Thursday night random experimentation kind of dojo stuff. It turned out to work way, way better than I thought it was going to. Am I going to buy a second unit of bears? Probably not, because they're expensive and I can't think of another use case for them. But this worked way better than I thought it was going to. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.